This is Speak the Grift, the podcast that handles fraud, embezzlement, and corruption at small to mid-sized nonprofits. I'm your host, Phil Stanch, and tonight's episode will be handling the Portland Marathon. This podcast is Speak the Grift. In it, I've covered 3 cases where funds given for a charitable purpose were spent not on the charitable mission, but instead to pay the personal bills and enrich those people in charge of the nonprofit. Were there victims? With financial crimes like theft and fraud, the perpetrators often present the crime itself as victimless. It's not like I killed someone, they claim. The public's eyes glaze over when a financial crime gets too complicated. The most interesting true crime stories are about murder, not about stealing, embezzling, or fraud. Remember, if it bleeds, it leads. If it bleeds, it leads. But I'm a contrarian on that topic. Every theft has a victim. So when we talk about fraud and grift on a smaller scale, we need to show that victim. For example, the poor are often the victim of general fraud and corruption. Pick any sector of any society in any country in the world where graft and corruption are rampant and unchecked, and you will find how the poor of that society are victimized. In some places, poor families spend up to 1/3 of their income on bribes to teachers for their children to receive better grades. Not a better education, just better grades. Those teachers, in turn, may have achieved their position through bribing school administrators to hire them. The schools they teach in may have been built by a construction company that provided kickbacks to government officials and didn't build a very good school. A country like the United States may seem like it lacks the depth of corruption seen in other places, but like all of history, the bias of our perspective may yield the wrong conclusion. The conclusion that we are without our own deep and pervasive problems in this area. I have covered these 3 stories and have attempted to provide relevance to sharing them in this podcast. There is no bleeding in any of these stories, but there are people and businesses who got sold a bill of goods when they donated or spent money with a charitable organization. This destruction of good works of a charitable nonprofit gets exposed and obliterates trust in legitimate nonprofit charities in that community. This results in undermining their ability to raise funds in their community. These stories have taken place in various places in the United States. Perhaps the relevance of each story is lessened by the fact that it isn't locally based. I'm covering crimes of the past in places 1,000 or so miles away. Instead, I should be looking locally and for corruption and current events. That's true, but these stories have had a purpose, as a dress rehearsal or practice, for eventually covering corruption in Central Texas. I even have topic number 1 in mind. Payday loans. How did those laws get passed, and who got paid off to pass them? There's a lot of profit in payday loans, and 400% loans, yeah, there'll be a lot of profit. But that's for a future podcast. Let's turn on the jets and fly out all the way to Tomball, Texas, where Lester V. Smith, aged 83, is presently serving a sentence of 3 years federal probation. Part of that sentence is 8 months of home confinement, which he is doing comfortably in one of his children's homes. Lester Smith was for 35 years the CEO of Portland Marathon Incorporated. Wait, sorry, I'm getting a technical problem here. I'm getting a rabbit hole alert. While researching good old Lester and his 35 years of grift, I have come across the Boston Marathon. We're going out to Boston. Prosecutors said Amy Malloy sent the One Fund several pages of purported medical records to claim for injuries she received during the Boston terrorist marathon bombings. She indicated she had surgery in Portland on her foot from an injury she sustained during those bombings. The One Fund issued her a payment of $8,000 in June 2014 after the One Fund announced that it could give out more money because more money had been donated. Malloy submitted submitted several pages of more medical records and indicating she underwent hip surgery as a result of the foot injury. Malloy would have received an additional $12,500 if her claim had been processed. Prosecutors said that her investigation revealed portions of Malloy's medical records were not authentic, and she was not treated for any bombing-related injuries. There's a lot more one fund fraud claims that happen because of the Boston terrorist bombings. Andrew Agaz of New York pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 2.5 to 3 years in a state prison in connection with collecting a fraudulent $480,000 claim from the One Fund. Two brothers from Boston were each sentenced to 3 years in state prison for attempting to defraud the One Fund of $2.195 million by submitting false claims on behalf of their dead aunt. Okay, I'm getting back from my rabbit hole now. So that rabbit hole story is more intriguing, correct? Certainly the amounts are pretty hefty, but the one thing that they get more is because they are a result of the Boston Marathon terroristic bombings. Finding the victim is a little easier there. What if the One Fund runs out of money because it's paid out to a bunch of thieves? There's your victims, the donors who gave in good faith, and then the victims who really got hurt, that didn't get the money because it all ran out because the thieves got it first. Okay, enough thrilling rabbit hole adventures. Let's get back to Lester. Time is running short. Let's tell the story and find the victims. Lester and a few of his colleagues ruled a nonprofit that organized the annual Portland Marathon. For 35 years, he did as he pleased and paid himself and a few others a six-figure salary for an event that only happens once a year. There was no effective board providing good checks and balances against his grifting activities. After 24 years of doing anything he wanted to do with the money, the complaints and suspicions started catching up. Excerpts from a press release of the U.S. Attorney's Office, District of Oregon. Beginning in January 2012 and continuing through 2017, Smith made or directed others to make unauthorized transfers of funds from PMI's bank account to his own personal checking account, paid various personal credit cards with PMI funds, and wrote unauthorized checks from PMI payable to himself. Remember that PMI is the nonprofit that organized the Portland Marathon. On one occasion, Smith used a PMI check to purchase a $60,000 Infiniti Sport utility vehicle. Smith also used stolen funds to pay for home remodeling projects, shopping sprees at department stores, home decor, furniture, and other luxury goods and services. Smith and another individual also incorporated a for-profit company called Next Events Productions, LLC, to consult with PMI about setting up and running events. Between 2012 and 2017, PMI made more than $302,000 in payments to Next Events. Investigators later discovered bank records from Next Events showing that once PMI funds were deposited, a substantial portion was transferred to Smith's personal bank account. To find the victims here takes a little thought. If Smith raises money to run a good event but then enriches himself instead, what are the results? Let's go to the OregonLive.com report dated October 11, 2016. A number of people who ran the Portland Marathon on Sunday ended up going farther than the standard 26.2 miles. According to various reports from runners who have emailed us, spoken with us, and posted on several Facebook pages, a number of runners participating in the Portland Marathon over the weekend were rerouted during the run and ended up running a half mile longer than they should have. Some runners take this very seriously. There are comments on the Facebook page of that year that said some runners didn't qualify to run in the Boston Marathon because their overall time was too slow because of the extra half-mile mistake. Qualifying to run and running in the Boston Marathon is a major feat in many runners' lives. So instead of a well-run event, you had a mishmash of well-meaning amateurs doing things for free and involuntarily screwing things up. Some parts of event planning are best managed professionally. Portland had raised the money. They just didn't spend it on anything but enriching Smith and his one or two friends. Another sideshow pertaining to finding the victim is when the wrong person gets the first place trophy. Well-meaning amateurs oversaw the official finish line duties instead of paid staff. It should have been professional staff in charge. It was easily affordable, if not for the massive theft and grifting. This also from the OregonLive.com website from October 10th, 2016. On Sunday, Matthew Palila, 34 of Bend, was the first person to cross the finish line of the Portland Marathon, but the trophy he should have received ended up going to someone else. I came across, and they didn't have the finisher's tape set up, said Palila over the phone Tuesday. I could see them scrambling to set it out. Just over 2 minutes later, Nate Bowen of Los Altos, California, crossed in the third place finish, but he got the first place trophy. The third place runner was given the first place trophy and left after a bit. Actually, most runners left that particular event because there were no decent end of marathon facilities to handle the cold, wet, tired, and hungry runners. Again, money that could have provided decent facilities was in the bank accounts of Smith and his cronies. More from that OregonLive.com article. Les Smith, event director of the Portland Marathon, said over the phone that the people at the finish line who were tasked and finding the top 3 men and women were giving their awards. They missed Palila. Instead, they gave the first place trophy to a slightly confused Bowen, who asked why they were giving it to him. And they said, because you won. After Bowen walked away, the people handling awards realized the mistake. They called me up in tears, Smith said. I told the ladies that this is not a problem. We'll simply make him a plaque and get it to him. Smith said that Bowen was eventually told about the mistake and that Palila will be given his award. So other victims. Let's go through them. The reputation of the entire city of Portland is at stake because what should be a showcase event to show off how great your city is had the reputation of being a total mess for years, according to all the Facebook comments I could find on the marathon's Facebook pages over the years. Any charities or sponsors associated with a marathon being poorly run, and then on top of that, being found to be some rich grifter's personal piggy bank. So the charities and sponsors were also the victims. It was hard to find a website listing the sponsors and the charities of the Portland Marathon during the period of Smith thievery and grifting. I'm guessing those domains and records are long gone. But you can extrapolate which sponsors and charities would have their reputation damaged if something like embezzlement came up. Let's look at them. A major medical provider, Toyota, various health food providers, Embassy Suites, a large local nonprofit charity, are among the sponsors who give money to the marathon with the idea that their money will be wisely spent on the event. That same local nonprofit charity, Windermere, shows up as a charitable beneficiary along with a couple other local youth charities. Insert a thieving grifter in all of this, and the marathon runners pay big fees, sponsors pay big fees of their share, and they create a big pile of cash. The thieves take most of that cash and hand out a few pennies to run the event, depending mostly on unpaid volunteers, and a few more pennies from that big pile of cash are given to the listed charities. The event goes poorly, and the charities have less money to do things like build homes for the unhoused, send disadvantaged youth to summer camp, or provide free medical care to poorer neighborhoods. It takes a village to raise a child. It just takes one thieving grifter over years and years of crime to make it harder to raise that child upright. So theft kind of happens like that. In a murder case, the victim is easily identifiable. In these cases, in most theft cases, it's also pretty easy to identify the person that it got stolen from. But in the case of to small nonprofits, it's harder to find the victim. So I hope I've kind of dug into that a little bit and give you some victims to identify with in these 4 fraud cases. This has been Speak the Grift. My name is Phil Stanch. Good night.